Okay.
All right, yeah.
Oh, I'm on. I was in a daze here. Didn't know we were already on. We are coming to you again Monday, and we're glad to see you out there and waiting for what we hope will be an exciting program. If it's not exciting, then blame me for it because I just got to the studio a little bit late, and we're kind of rushing things, but we're going to catch up, and I think you're going to learn something doing this next hour. Uh, Today, we're going to talk about something that's been on my mind for quite a while, but I haven't had a chance to do some catch up in terms of topics. I had a couple of topics that were lined up that I want to cover, and then today this topic, which is very current, and I thought we would get around to it last week, but there were some other things that happened that knocked that out, and then we had to go with some things that were more pressing at that time. But this topic right here that I chose, which is which we all, I think we're pretty much aware of the fact this election in 2020 had a lot of question marks around it, and those demonstrators, those patriots, really that went to Washington on January the 6th. I'm not surprised they made that day more infamous, or at least commensurate with the infamy of the Pearl Harbor attack. And they were trying to claim that this is one of the darkest days in American history. This is really a great day for the country because what the American people did was show they had an interest in the electoral politics, and they were not satisfied that they gotten their rights respected to elect their representatives, the highest official being the president of the United States, and they went to Washington to stand against what they had discerned correctly, that this election was taken from underneath the election returns that were to be determinatively assigned by the American people. Get my teeth in right. The people went to the polls on November the 3rd, 2020, and their vote, if their vote was sovereign, then that would have been the determination of whether or not Donald Trump, who had 12 million more votes now, don't forget that. How many incumbents can claim that their vote totals went up after being an incumbent for 4 years? And then the numbers of people that were satisfied with their presidential pretensions and the outlook, their handling of the affairs of the nation. How many person can claim that after 4 years of that, where people have been able to look and monitor what you're doing in the presidential office, which I admit is one of the most difficult jobs in the world because there are so many different responsibilities, and I've been in positions of authority where you're wearing different hats and have different responsibilities. Some of which does not really fall underneath your umbrella, so to speak, but you're responsible for everything because the buck stops at your desk, and you have to take the blame for it because it's on your watch that it occurs. That goes with the territory, and I think Donald Trump did it very well, and people were appreciative of the fact that he had done a very good job. He did a very good job, and they rewarded him with an additional 12 million votes. How many times have you seen that in American history where the incumbent's popularity goes his popularity goes up once he's been in office for 4 years? We're tired of the president after 4 years. And I mean, not all of them, but most of them, it's like you go along with the. Some of them have been repeats, but we've had a number of presidents that served one term, and the country couldn't take it anymore. I mean, Carter, a good example of that. Carter had been in there from 76 to 80. He had come in as an outsider, and he's going to go in and do some cleanup based upon what had happened during the Nixon administration. and he had come in. Carter coming in after Ford. Ford came in and uh, up there to the vice presidency after he had been appointed to that by and this is this by Nixon. Nixon had appointed him in after what was the person name from Maryland? The vice president who had forced to step down.
Spiro Agnew.
Spiro Agnew forced him to step down because Spiro Agnew was involved in a lot of different things, and the criminality of his conduct when he was governor of Maryland had caught up with him, and they told him that he was going to be leaving, whether he wanted to leave or not. If he failed to leave, then they were going to bring some other things to bear upon his case. And so Spiro Agnew stepped down, and then that had a tumbling effect. Agnew steps down, and then they bring in Gerald Ford, which some thought that would be anti-impeachment insurance because who wanted to see Gerald Ford as the president? When Min Person was saying that this man had a problem walking and chewing bubblegum at the same time.
I'd let Nebraska claim him because that's originally he was born in Nebraska. So they say he was the first president and he was from Michigan. Nah, yeah. I'll let Nebraska claim him.
Yeah.
I mean, I even thought he was bad when I was a kid when he was the president. I'm like, oh God,
John. It looked like he was putting him in there. Oh, the wolves were. I mean, who let the dogs out? And the wolves were howling and were nibbling at the feet of this administration. They were after blood. And so I think Nixon was. I think the choice there, because I know a lot of things were going into what the choice really came out in the end to be. But I mean, there's a lot of things going on in the background. Don't forget, Gerald Ford had been one of the 7 members of the Warren Commission report. And so some of that was involved in it as well. But I think that what Nixon was doing was making sure that you got a choice between Nixon and Gerald Ford, and you're going to move Nixon out and put Ford up there. I don't think so. But they wanted Nixon out. They wanted Nixon out more than they were afraid of Gerald Ford going in. Maybe that's part of maybe that's the prelude to Biden. Now that I think about it, because Ford was not demented, but his intellectual acumen was not much greater than that of than Biden. Biden was never a very smart person, but we have not had a lot of rocket scientists in that position. Good thing they've had cabinets. It's a good thing that Roosevelt had a cabinet. Roosevelt was not that smart, and you could tell by the policies they put in. It was striking out everything he did was striking it down as unconstitutional. But then he intimidated the court, so they then fell in line behind it. And after the election of 1936, they fell in line and did not. After he began to threaten to pack the Supreme Court in 1937, then they fell in line. And don't tell me the court cannot be intimidated, because after that threat to pack the Supreme Court, a president behavior in the Oval Office was not another act of the president was ruled unconstitutional. That's from 1937 now up to the 1990s. As the court was told to back off, and they backed off. Just like Amy Coney Barrett has backed off. Look what she's doing now. They didn't so intimidated Barrett. She's jumped over there with the liberals on the court. Okay, keep that in mind, because I'll be reading some in a few minutes, because I want to make a couple of points here about Article 3. We don't talk about Article 3 too much. We spent a lot of time talking about Article 1, the legislative branch of government, and then Article 2 comes in because of the executive branch. But I want to go into Article 3, Section 1. I want to talk about that for a few minutes, and I'll tell you what word I want you to focus on when we get to that, the third article. But what I'm getting at here, and the point I'm trying to make, if I can ever get around to my main point, is that we have to pay attention to what's happening with these appointments and the politics in back of the appointments. And that appointment of once Agnew was forced out, I think Nixon knew then, by forcing a vice president to step down, they forced him out of there. They told Spiro Agnew in no uncertain terms that he was going to leave and vacate that position. Now, I don't know if at that point in time they had determined at that point that Nixon had to go also. He definitely had a mandate to be in there because Richard Nixon in 1972, when he ran for re-election, and he had run in 68 when they were having all these disturbances in the streets. All these demonstrations were going on in 1968, and people were voting for Nixon who ran on a law and order campaign. And he ran on law and order because people were in the streets and doing what they're doing right now at these universities. They think they're going to do that under Trump. Trump is like Nixon in that sense, and that is he came in under law and order. We have to restore law and order. We can't have chaos in the country. We have to have the rule of law. And so he came in very strongly, and people were tired of these demonstrators going on and people out here bursting windows and things like that. The youth in more rebellion than ever before. You couldn't blame all of it on Presley. You couldn't blame this on Evans moving to Pevis and showing him from the waist up on Ed Sullivan's show. It was more than that. I know they're saying that. I know a lot of you can't go back and relate to this because this is before your time. But this before Presley became an icon, he was getting a lot of blame for it. It was saying the youth are getting out of control because they saw Evans up there swirling his hips around and stuff like that. And they were blaming him for all the kids that wanted to be out. I wanted to be Evans. I wanted to sound like him. He had a unique sound. But it was more than that. It was a lot of things going on, and people were seeing some of the things that they thought were more perfect than it was. We thought we had already established a more perfect union as found in the preamble of the Constitution. And to find people out there demanding their rights and things like that was stunning to the American people. We weren't used to seeing anything like that, where people were talking about we have to march again and put the issue where it's supposed to be, and they're out here demonstrating in the street. They wanted that calm down. We weren't used to seeing anything like that. In fact, the news was very plastic at that point. You know, it used to have news programs. There wasn't a lot of news to be covered. News used to be 15 minutes. I don't know if you can recall that or not. News programs were like 15 minutes. They wanted to get back to the Lone Ranger. I mean, I did. And there were programs on there like My Three Sons. You know, these programs that were we were more family oriented. Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, things like that, and so on. We were more placid, and you know, we were in like a cocoon, and everything was Ozzie Nelson and that kind of the Ricky Nelson. That's the kind of thing they were doing. The program was very family-like programming. Red Skelton on Sunday and things like that. So when we come out of that kind of environment, and people out there demonstrating, and people having dogs put on them, that was stunning to the American people. We weren't used to seeing anything like that. And that's where you began to take the news programs, because they got some news now to report. Wasn't a whole lot of news that was going on because they were not letting us in on what they were doing in Washington. We thought They were up there taking care of the people's business. So when they in '68, when you had the assassination of Martin Luther King, we already had the assassination of John F. Kennedy in '63, and then Malcolm X '65, and then King in '68, April the 4th of that year, and people were tearing stuff up because of that, and all this placid understanding of what country we're living in, it raised the question: what country are we actually living in? Because that's not the country that we were born. You have people saying this today that I'm not living in the country I was born in. What country were you born in? Were you born in the United States? Well, it's the same country. What they're saying is that what they were putting on TV was not what they were looking at when they were out there looking at what's going on in the street. And they weren't used to seeing that. The TV was projecting one view. I know the view we had of the FBI was very different than what the FBI was actually doing, because we watched it in terms of the programming on, what station was it on? CBS, I think it was, when they had Efren Zimbalist Jr. playing the role of an FBI agent, and we liked Efren Zimbalist Jr. He made his fame in '77 Sunset Strip with Ed Cookie Burns. Remember him combing his hair? Everybody wanted to be like him, and they had a whole comic book out with things that Ed Cookie Burns had said were cool, and he had lifted all that out of the street vernacular and so on and so forth. But he was cool, and was always combing his hair and things like that. That's the kind of country we're living in, or we thought we were living in. Then all of a sudden you see all these people out here, and they're out there demonstrating. What is this? What is people were asking, what's going on here? Where did this guy come from? From Memphis. Who is this guy? And saying you ain't nothing but a hound dog. It was shocking. I know. I can remember. I can remember my mom. My mom couldn't understand Elvis Presley. Couldn't stand him and couldn't understand him. Couldn't understand what is that. She was watching. She liked to watch Perry Como, and singers that would stand there and just the vocals. When you're singing, you're just singing. You're not out there dancing and singing. They're not invented and put singing and dancing together yet. And I guess that dates me, but things were changing and people were not ready for it. Now, I have to tell you this. We were excited about it. We didn't like the music of our parents. And that's the way that's the way it always going to be. People talk about the children are different today than they were then. They may be singing it differently. I hear a lot of people saying that the children have changed. The children have not changed. People talk about their childhood. Let me go ask you. Okay, your childhood was good. That's your view. Let me go talk to your mother about it. Let's see I understand your perfection and how you saw it and so on. But let me talk to your mom about how perfect you were. Let me get the other page. This is what I was trying to think last week. The guy's name, Paul Harvey. Page 2. Let me go to page 2 and find out what they have to say about it, because I can guarantee you my view of my childhood is very different from my mom's view. And I have a lot of respect for the fact that what I wanted to do, my mom was not going to let me do it. And I remember her saying a lot of times to me, if you, because we were always rolling our eyes and getting mad and all that, and she would tell me, you think I'm wrong, just live long enough. And two of them didn't live long enough. One I had a brother that died at 15, had a sister died at 29. One drowned, and then my sister died at 29 out of complications. Just very painful things that happened. But those of us that live longer, I think I had a brother that died, and another brother died in 19. And died in 2000. I'm the last one in my family on my mom and dad side. And my sister, which is on my dad's side, we didn't have the same mom, is still alive in Detroit. But I can remember the parents and my parents' view of things, my mom's view of things. My mom basically was the one that raised me. And I remember those switches. My mom wasn't buying it. I done told you. I remember those days. My mom was one of those moms that believed they could hear through their back. But we were in a little a smaller zone of the world, and we thought we were living in you're living in a small part of America, but you think that's you're living in the whole country. And so when parts of the country were out here doing things that were not going on in our neighborhood, we couldn't fathom that. Our day was going to school, doing our homework, going to movies on the weekend. They cost a dime to get up there in the balcony where they're sitting in the Association of the South at that time. And yet you go to movies on Saturday, and you watch whatever they have on the basic cowboy pictures and things like that, and going out to the Wild West, and that was very good. And all of a sudden in 63, you got the president of the United States assassinated. Where did that come from? Well, president, that's in the past. And we had a president being assassinated. That was stunning. I could not believe it. I'm a sophomore now in college. Let's see. I'm 19 years old at this point. And we couldn't believe that a president, how could that happen? And then 5 years later, on February 21st of 1965, that would be 2 years later, Malcolm X is assassinated. And then 3 years after Malcolm X was assassinated, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And then after that, in June, King was assassinated in April, and in June, Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. And we were being asked, what in the world is going on here? It rocked. I know it rocked my world. I didn't have to hear Michael Jackson do that later on with that song he did, but no, this is like your whole world, your understanding of the world, like it was tumbling in on you. We couldn't figure out what was going on because I admit I was very starry-eyed and I can't believe how naive I was, but I believed I believed what I was taught, and they had a very narrow lens in which they taught us the world we were living in. We're not really taught a lot to think. We were taught to. I was taught in school how to memorize, and you learn the timetables. You learn how to recite different things, the Gettysburg Address and White Christmas. You had to learn that. These were recitation type things, rote type things. The analytical things, it took me going to I think even beyond undergraduate school, quite frankly, because I began to become a little bit more analytical in undergrad. but my analytical ability, and I think I'm pretty analytical right now. Not bragging about it, but I think I'm fairly, and I can look at things and pretty much see into what is being said a lot better than most of the persons that I have in my peer group. And I became very analytical at the graduate level. It's just something that happens. I now see it just it's part of the training. You get trained, and then it just comes with the territory. You have to be more. You're being led into places where some analysis is necessary, and some seeing into what you're reading is necessary in order to figure out what's being said. I became very good at it, by the way. I was a very good student in the graduate school. I give Eastern a lot of credit. They don't have a good football team. I give them credit for for what they did. And I was a scholar at Eastern Michigan University and at Michigan State and at U of M and at Wayne. I've been to all of them, and I was walking through these institutions. Quite frankly, I will tell you this: all these different things that were going on began to rock my world, and I was stunned out of the classic world I lived in and forced to come out of that because what I was walking around with in the back recesses of my mind, I was being torn away from that by the present events that were taking place right before my very eyes. And I had to go and begin to do a reanalysis of what was going on. I began to think about that in my sophomore year when I was 19 years old, and I was trying to figure out how could that happen. Well, okay, today here's my topic that I chose for today, and that was the theft of the election of 2020. I would never have had that in my mind. I never thought of the election of 1948 could have been anything other than what they reported. This is Dewey and Truman running in the election, and everybody predicted that Truman had no shot. Papers were out the morning of the election and the day after the election, and went to bed with the idea that Truman had lost. Everybody was expecting him to lose. Only to wake up the next morning, and there is this headline. First of all, the first headline that came out in the early edition of the New York Times was um, Dewey wins. Then later on, they had to retract that, and then by the time the later early morning edition came out, they got a totally different story. Nobody raising their eyebrows about it. But boy, do we look at it through a different lens now. What was going on, and even at that point, that we were too blind to see because of what our training was to be. This how we saw it in this little window of understanding we've been given in a world where rote was more. The training was that. I think that's very good, very important training. But I think you have to learn some things as a background, as a basis of the other things you'll learn along the way. But I think some memorization is very much necessary in your education when you're young, because a lot of what you learn in memorization, you come back when you're gaining the analytical skills, which you develop that later on. But you have to have a foundation, which it in fact lays, and it lays into an environment where the road information was. I think they had a very good hierarchical way of instructing. We're much better and more literate at that point than we are right now. You can have all the department of education you want, but if you don't have the way of understanding how you build a foundation for learning, you'll never get there. I don't care how many times you have, how many departments you have, how much money you spend, unless you understand how you build upon the information already embedded, you'll never get there. That's why we fall behind in all the schools. We don't understand it. We don't understand how you, in fact, develop an educational system They did. I give them credit. They did that. I'm a lot further ahead because of the foundations they laid. I mean, but I think they could have turned me loose, quite frankly, when I was like in maybe when I was in 10th grade, they could have turned me loose. 'Cause I was a reader by that time, and at that point, just turned me loose and put me in the library, and I'll be fine. But now, I don't know where we're going with this, but this is not it. We have we have a whole different thing going on politically right now. And what we have happening right now, quite frankly, is that we have presidents going in and out of office based upon the persons that are running things from behind the scenes. We have a veiled government in this country, the deep state. That's as real as rain. And Candace Owens, I give you a lot of credit because I don't know how much reading Candace Owens does, but I can tell you one thing: if she and I don't get an impression she's a reader. I never hear her quoting any books that she's read or anything like that. That's not her stick. So I'm not sure if I don't think it comes out of a literacy type of background. I think she just has great intuition. But she said some time ago, a couple of months ago, she said, if you're not a conspiracy theorist, you're not very bright. Nobody would say that back in that time period. But today, yep. If you're not a conspiracy theorist today, if you are that person, George Moss, that you were when you were a good student, because you learned what they told you to learn and recite what they told you to recite. They told me to learn the Gettysburg Address. Every student had to learn that. I learned that in 8th grade. And just a lot of rote things that they told you. I mean, timetables, that's still automatic with me. I know I'm up to 12. It's automatic because that's how they taught at that time. I don't think they do too much of that anymore. I was surprised when I went to some of the elementary schools and would sit in on some of the classes and things like that. I was surprised that the kids didn't know the timetables. And if you don't know your timetables, how do you do anything that requires looking at like a division problem and knowing how many times this number can be divided by that number? You could do that through just knowing up to 12 times 12. I mean, it's 144, right? And you just kind of know that automatically. Some things are the timetables are just automatic. You learn that, and it becomes like part of your intellectual persona the rest of your life. I will never forget um, my timetables because that's elementary school for me. The Gettysburg Address, I know many parts of it. They taught it just that's the way they taught, and you had people you had to learn the presidents and all that. I used to know them all the way down. Starting with the great George Washington, going down to let's see, when I came out of high school, I think when I came out of elementary school, I think that let's see, came I would have gone to high school at 14 because I've been double promoted in elementary school, and I think I came out of elementary school at 14 years of age, and I've been let's see, 14. That would have been 50, 58. So that would have been during the term of Dwight D. Eisenhower, and you couldn't have told me that Eisenhower was not almost like to me. He was a president, so he was like a god in my mind because you had this idea these persons were walking in the same office. They had come behind George Washington. George Washington, the greatest president. I still believe this. I was taught this, and but not so much that they told me he's the first president, but I think he was the greatest president we've had, and I still say that today. He was the greatest president we've had. But you could not have told me that these presidents were not almost like gods, because that's kind of the way in which they were training us. They were training us into a belief in our country, not what we now look at as our country, which is a different place. Many people say they were not born in this country. They were born in this country, but the country was not the. This is not the country that they that they thought they were living in. George Carlin was very good in pointing that out. George Carlin, the comedian, was very good in pointing it out, because he was always talking about the other side, and so people were bringing him to college campus, and now he was waking people up through his humor. They were laughing at him, but the man was a thinker. Now, 2025. Here's the topic. Could not have been the topic in that time period. Look at the topic today. The topic is the theft of the election of 2020, and which I think is connected to, and the war in Ukraine. Let me tell you what I wrote today on Facebook. It will go unchallenged. If everything else that I write goes unchallenged. They're not going to challenge me in the area of my training. They're not going to do that, because I was trained, first of all, through Rote. I think Rote that's why I think Rote has a very important role to play. Learn some things so you just have some basic understanding just through Rote training. They don't do enough of that today. No Rote training is going on. But that's something you should get in elementary school. And they did that well. Now, I got so much of it that that's all I had when I came out of high school. I had a lot of Rote training. But boy, have I built on it from that point. And I have not been in a university yet. Not one. And I've been to all of them here in Michigan. I have not been in one yet where I did not feel that I was right at the top of the chart. I'm sorry to say that may not say a whole lot about the university too, in terms of that, but I don't think that it discredits the university. It's just that you pay all this money, and sometimes you go in there and all you're doing is getting the credential, not necessarily advancing your understanding of things. A lot of it is just get the. But that's that's another thing I wish I had done. I would probably have 2 PhDs right now, maybe 3, based on the number of hours I had when I finally, got more credential. My thing was just a learning. I must have had about 90 hours before I got my master's degree. Because I was just I was interested in this, and then that come up. I like that class, and just the learning part. It's like the idea of learning. And when I finally got to the master's degree, I think I got my master's degree from Eastern in 1987. Now I had finished undergrad in let's see, what year was that? 1966. Because I started in 62, so in 1966. But look at the gap. But it wasn't I was not in school. I was in school every summer. And sometime during the regular year or two, taking classes, 1 here, 2 there, just because I was interested in everything. And when I finally, one guy told me, a guy named Vernon Farmer told me, he said, he saw me down at the university library all the time. He said, George, You're down here all the time in the library. You're doing the work, but you want me to get the degree. I didn't care about the degree at that point. I had a degree, so I was just interested in just kind of at this point just learning what I wanted to learn. But that was some good advice. And then in '87, I got back into the degree programs, and I went to Easton, where I finally settled down and did 2 degrees at Easton. But I have to tell you that if I had gotten credit for all the learning I had done on the way to those degrees, I would have a number of degrees. I've written a number of books even now. One I try to get published, but there are some other things I've written, and I write 2 books a year, really, just on Facebook, the equivalent of 2 books a year, because I write the longest posts on Facebook. And none of what I've written has been contradicted by these scholars. But man have your views, George Moss, been changed by the circumstances of the country, which have changed dramatically from the way the country I view in the 50s and the country I view right now in 2025. This is a 75-year gap. Let's see, 50 to from the 50s to this is a 75-year gap. And this topic today is a learning of a very different type of understanding than I would ever imagine I would have had back in that time period, because I was very much grounded in terms of the perfection of the United States of America. Not, I thought we'd already arrived at what the preamble promised. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. I thought we'd arrived there. We were already at that point. And nobody could have convinced me that we had not arrived there, because I thought we were living in perfection. So much was being said. I was taking it all in, very happy with the way things appeared to be. And I was probably most stunned than anybody in the country when I found out that much of that plastic kind of thing was more imagined than real. It stunned me when I began to do my own research and come out of some of my bad habits, which was accepting the things I was taught without question. Now I question everything. And I will tell you this topic today would not have been even conscionable, not the way I was thinking back in that time period, to question the election being taken and then having a primordial reason for why that went on the way it did in 2020. I would not have thought about that. It would have been impossible to think about it. Not my mindset was just, I was like a lot of the person I talk to now. I understand them very well because I was in that place. You could not have told me the world operated differently than what I thought. But now I'm saying this today. The election in 2020 had a motive behind it. And the motive was that they had awakened to the fact that Donald Trump could win. They didn't think he could win in 2016, but it was stunned into saying this man was a serious candidate and a patriot. The things we talked about, this man was really standing up on those things. And we thought that that's what they were standing up on in Washington, but if they were standing up on that in Washington, he would not be having all the problems he's having. But Donald Trump was, he's bringing that. But I know where it comes from, because that's what the country was teaching back in the day. Donald Trump is a carrier of that idea. I don't know where he got it from, what his training was like, but I hear him back in that time period, and I think he is Eric Hoffa's. I think he's Eric Hoffa's true believer. I think he's really that he is that guy. I don't think he's putting anything on here. I think that's who Donald Trump is, a super patriot. And that's part of why they don't want him. That's why they gave him so much trouble when we spoke last Tuesday in front of the total Congress, and why he got so much. No one on the other side applauded. I think they applauded. One person I think applauded when he talked about the money given to Ukraine. A little tepid applause on that. That's the only time they actually clap. Because Donald Trump is doing something that we talk about, but they're not used to seeing that in Washington, D.C. because they know who they are. They're not those persons. And they underestimated Donald Trump in 2020. Well, not in 2020 so much as they did in 2016. They underestimated Donald Trump in 2016 for sure. And I said in my post today, and I was stand uncorrected. I said in my post today, if they had taken Donald Trump seriously in 2016, Donald Trump would never have been allowed to go into the White House. Would not have been allowed. But what happened in 2016, they were so assured they had the candidate in Hillary Clinton. They bypassed Biden and elevated the Secretary of State, former Secretary of State, up to the position of running for the party mantle. Bypassed Joe Biden, who was the vice president at that time. He got good and got excellent later on somehow. But if he'd been such a star, they would not have gone beneath his position and gotten and elevated the Secretary of State up to his position of running as the president when the vice president was still there. Have you ever seen that before? No, I haven't ever seen it before, and I'm a historian. I've never seen it before, where you leapfrog over the vice president and give the position of the presidential mantle to the Secretary of State over the vice president, who has an interest in and has a legal, has a constitutional right to the position. Hadn't run for president before, so he's certainly eligible for it, even under the 22nd Amendment, the two-term limit. But leapfrogging over the vice president, it never happened before. Never. That never happened before. And then they have him come back in 2020 and do a slam dunk. I'm gonna tell you something. You could have told me that when I was in my childhood. You can't tell me that today. Mouse is too. I'm too sharp. I'm so much sharper now than I was then. I'm not buying that, and I'm not buying it in a different way than it wasn't bought by people like Sidney Powell, who I have a lot of respect for, but she made a mistake. You can't go off and start talking about no machines and bring another dynamic into why you are challenging the authenticity of that election in 2020, as she in fact correctly did. But you can do right things incorrectly. And they were in fact challenging the outcome of the election because the election made no sense, but you cannot do it in the way in which they did it. And I kept trying to say to them, you're not fighting this fight the right way. The fight is correct. The methodology that you're using is incorrect. They gave them an out, and that's why they had to make these deals they made. They had to plead down from what they had charged with because they had them by the ankle by what they were claiming. The machines were not the problem. The problem what they fed into machines over and over and over again, with the same voters being fed into machines over and over again, where they were multiplying the votes and things like that, so as a needs to in different parts of the state, where there was a shortcoming of the vote, they made up for it in terms of cheating them out of the election. The American people didn't elect Biden in 2020. I'm telling you that, and the history books will bear me out when they write the history about it. I'm writing about it now, but I got to get off Facebook. I can't get off Facebook. If I get off Facebook, then there are things that would not be said that I'm saying. Nobody else is saying it. So I'm on Facebook every day. Unchallenged, by the way. Ain't no scholar in this country going to challenge what I'm writing. Not in this area. And they know I'm out here. They know. I tell you this, none of them will have said or even thought about what I wrote today in my post on Facebook. Because the election of 2020 was tied into the war in Ukraine. See, here's what Donald Trump says. He says that the war in Ukraine would never have occurred. This is a quote from him. If I had been president, he's right. If he were the president in 2020, the war in Ukraine would not have occurred. It has nothing to do with anybody being afraid of Donald Trump. But what Donald Trump doesn't understand is this point that I made in my post today. It's because it would not have occurred if Donald Trump were president. It's why he was not president. Understand that point. See, he always says, if I had been president, the war in Ukraine would not have taken place. He's correct about that. But he doesn't understand that's why he was not the president. It wasn't that he was not elected by the people to be president, it's why he was not allowed to go into the office. And I would say this too, and nobody's going to contradict me on this. The history was going to record I'm right. The reason why he was allowed to go into the presidency in 2016 is because they didn't have any contingency plans to do anything else, like to stop him, for example. They had become so smug and so arrogant and thinking they had the right one in Hillary Clinton. They put her in place of Biden and put her up there. They thought they had a winning hand, and they didn't have a winning hand. Why? Because they did not understand who they had on the other side. They didn't understand who they were. You see, their prognostication of this election would have been true of every other person that could have run in 2016, in that election 2016. Every other person who could have run the Republican Party that year, the prognostication would have been correct in terms of the outcome of the election. That is, say Hillary Clinton would be the president. And they were so smug about it that they just simply did not put a contingency plan in place to what if that doesn't happen. They thought it was a done deal. And who would have thought it was a done deal? The man never held a political office. They were laughing at him, but they didn't understand the man's work ethic. The man didn't run to show up. The man ran to win. And while they were laughing, I can go back and look in that place where they were cracking jokes. Obama was, and he's up there saying Donald Trump, blah blah, and making all these jokes and trying to laugh this man down. I looked at Donald Trump over there, and what Donald Trump was doing, he wasn't laughing, he was seething, building his energy up, and then walked out of that room. I'm pretty sure at that point he was determined to run and to win. And they laughed all the way up until November the 8th, 2016. They weren't laughing on November the 9th. I want you to notice something else that happened in that election. That was this. Donald Trump came down to claim the victory that on the morning of November the 9th. Took a long time to come before the microphone. When he came down, he said, "Sorry, keep you waiting." But he was talking about the funny business that he had to go through. The business was that Hillary Clinton was so stunned by the outcome that she did not concede. He couldn't come down and claim the victory until the concession had been made. It wasn't until very early the next morning that happened. But people were stunned by it. People didn't believe the results. You ought to go back and watch those newscasts where they were holding off the news that was the bad news. They thought it would get better, so they weren't reporting that. And they kept reporting she won this, she won that, and she won another thing. But then the other returns started coming in, one after the other. You can see even Megyn Kelly. They were sitting there. They knew that blue wall had been penetrated. And then one domino after the other began to fall. And then later on, around a certain time of that night, they saw that given that result, that this election was over. And they were stunned by it because they've been laughing all the time up until that point. The Trump factor. Now, I tied in my post today on Facebook the election of Donald Trump and the war in Ukraine. It's not any difference. It's not any different than the taking out of power John F. Kennedy and the war in Vietnam. The war in Vietnam is tied into the assassination of John F. Kennedy and some other things too. But did you notice the course correction, quote unquote correction, made in the aftermath of John F. Kennedy's assassination? John F. Kennedy was pulling those troops out of Vietnam. It was advisors at that point. But after the assassination was over in 1963, and that occurred in November of that year, in 1964, we have 250,000 troops on the Westmoreland being committed in Vietnam. There's a whole different direction that the war in Vietnam took as a result of that assassination. And that's why I wanted to title this discussion here about what happened in the aftermath of Donald Trump having the election taken from him in 2020, and it was taken from him. I said in my post today, nobody's going to challenge that. They might disagree with it. Ain't none of them going to disagree with it publicly. None of the scholars are. They're not going to say one word about it. And the people that be writing this history will write what I'm saying. I'm not right. Will write the conclusion that I'm talking about. Not because I'm saying it. They'll write the conclusion. I already drawn the conclusion. I looked at all the evidence. You see what you're taught in grad school. I have to give them a lot of credit. I give Easton a lot of credit. I don't know if it would have been different. Trying to think about. I really have not been in a place where I thought that it was any better than it was at Eastern. Really, they got these big names, things like that. You have great football teams. They're about all the same, quite frankly. The college, the university are pretty much all the same. They're all pretty placid. And the training is not any different at Eastern than it was at. Was it different at Wayne? Wayne was where I got my first graduate training. I don't think it was there. That was in '67. I don't think that it was that. I had to go back and think about how it was. It's like a shadowy memory, but I don't think it was that different. But along the way, you do learn, you do pick up some analytical skills that you didn't have in your formative training. Get more analytical. You're looking at documents, and you have to then discern what the documents are saying, and you have to get better at it, and get better at it by doing it. So that's the transition that I'm making today. I'm saying that I would never have said this topic back in that time period, but I will tell you this: Donald Trump is right in saying that this war would not have happened if he had been president. But what he does not get is that that's exactly why they did not allow him in there in 2020. He won the election in 2020.
Even Putin said that if President Trump had been president, it would be unlikely to happen. The Ukrainian invasion would unlikely happen.
Yeah,
Yeah, he
yeah,
said that.
John. They would not have had to invade. You know why? Because Donald Trump would have understood that the provocation. See, Donald Trump today understands the provocation. The provocation. They're saying that now. Donald Trump is saying that right now.
This didn't happen 3 years ago. It started in 2014 when, during the Obama administration, they installed Zelensky. They did not allow Zelensky was not properly elected by our standards. He was installed by the Obama administration because he's part of the globalist agenda.
Yeah.
Putin didn't want that. Plus, he didn't want to be ringed to death with the NATO countries aligned with NATO. That would be no different than us getting all anxious back in '62 of October of '62 when the Soviets had weapons pointed at us from Cuba. There's no difference.
Right.
I can understand. Anybody thinks that Putin's a weirdo for being concerned about that doesn't know international politics or military strategy.
Listen to that, and listen to people like Sachs, Jeffrey Sachs. Listen to him. Listen to Jeffrey Sachs a lot more than you do. You'll find out that it's not that picture they've been painting. It's another picture out there you need to look at that they don't put in front of you. I've not seen Jeffrey Sachs. I never seen John Mearsheimer on a single one of those talk shows. I never see him on there. I see him on certain podcast programs. I never see him on the major networks where the FCC has something to say about it, and they have to be very careful about who they bring on TV because they got FCC licensing they have to be concerned about. So you don't see Jeffrey Sachs on TV, but you need to listen to his voice a lot more to find out what's really going on. He's an expert in that area. He and John Mearsheimer. They are the experts in that area. They're trained in a very different area. I bow down to them in that area. I mean, I read in that area, but I compare what I know or what I think I know in that area where they have an expertise in that area. My training is in a different area. But I have to respect them because I do understand when I'm listening to a superior, understanding in the area that I'm reading in, and they are the voices in that area, both of them. I think Jeffrey Sachs is probably more along my line than it is John Mearsheimer, but I listen to both of them are learned in that area. They're not in my area; they're in a different area, and I have to give them a lot of the credit for what they say, because I go and check behind them too. I check behind them also. I read all those CISI reports that they talk about. I went and read it for myself. But then I go back to them to find out if what I got from what I read is commensurate with these scholars who are in that area. They should know better than I know. But I don't go in the area. I don't go in the area blind. But I have to. I'm not the only scholar that's out here, and I have to respect the fact that they're different departments of scholarship And they got more training in that area than I have. In that area, they have more training. This war right here that we're in would not have been fought if Trump had been there. But I'm sure what Trump would not have done. And that's very clear from the comments that Trump has made. Trump would never have provoked this war. They kept poking the bear. They knew exactly what they were doing. And they kept coming across lines that had been drawn. And they kept drawing these lines further and further in Eastern Europe until they got to the doorstep of Russia. And that's why I tell people that you don't have to know who the aggressor is by reading all the books that I've read and the articles I've read. Go get a map and look at it. And look in 1949 when NATO was set up, and look at the 12 nations that were in NATO originally and why it's called NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, 10 European countries and 2 countries in the Western Hemisphere, Canada and United States. 10 in Europe, 2 in the Western Hemisphere. And those 12 nations made up NATO. NATO now is made up of 33 nations. 33. And all those nations are added as NATO move east. I'm with Jeffrey Sachs on this point, 100%. NATO could have packed up in 1991 after they had after Russia had allowed and made a deal with, through the Warsaw Pact and all the rest, to allow for the unification of Germany, East Germany and West Germany, with the idea that after that, the territorial ambitions of the Western Alliance, the NATO nations, would in fact end with that unification. That's the agreement they made in 1991. They made that agreement. I'm telling you what happened. And then they kept coming across that line. You go look where Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia are right now. They're right on Russia's western border. A little bit here, a little bit there, and so on. But then look at the wider and larger border that Ukraine is. And Biden, who I have no respect for, I loathe Biden more so than Dennis Prager, who I hope gets well very soon, by the way, because Dennis Prager is now sick.
Dennis Prager is a neocon.
Yeah,
I don't like him at all.
Well, John, I think he's a smart man. You don't like him at all?
No, I don't, because he is basically, you got to get on the Zionist worship train with him, and I'm not. Okay, I mean, I just see it as a foreign country. They're established. They should run on their own. He still tries to build the case that we got to constantly overlook whatever they do to them and stuff. Anybody?
I understand your point. Now let me ask you this question, John. I know how you feel about. Okay, so do you throw the baby out with the bathwater, though? I mean,
okay, he's done some stuff, but okay, I don't like the idea he tries to fuse Judeo-Christianity. Okay, that's the idea of Judeo-Christianity. Christianity's got much higher sets of ethical considerations and expectations than Judaism.
Okay,
and that's what another thing is too. He tries to build a case that there's a solidity and there's unity. There's not. They've been total in opposition until just the past 60, 80 years. And when we had this dispensationalist theology that Schofield and stuff, created in that book, the Schofield Study Bible. Mm-hmm. And so basically he builds on that, and it's not true Christianity. It's a poor representation of Christianity. It didn't exist 1800, better part of 1800 years prior to like the 1800s in this, and it's largely in this country. Of course, the English people are behind it too, the British Zionists. So, Prager's all part of that. And it's basically lockstep. He loves constant warfare too. That's what neocons are. There's always looking for a conflict.
Yeah, okay.
And that's why I don't like neocons.
I can buy that. I have a lot of respect for Dennis Prager, but I do understand what you're saying. I kind of pushed that a little bit aside as I began to recognize that this is a fresh voice in terms of a clear thinker. He's an out of the box thinker. I have a lot of respect for him. But I do take into consideration what John says as well. I mean, John is very clear. I already knew the answer when I was asking John that question. I knew what he was going to say. Prager, but I would say this about Prager in terms of Biden. Prager said some time ago that he's the only president, he says, that I actually loathe. He loathes Joe Biden. And that's a very different view of Biden. That people trying to say this man is a nice man and so on and so forth. You ought to hear this man, hear what they say about this man says behind closed doors and how he's cursing everybody out and things like that. How nasty this man is. But I see him in public as being that too. He doesn't hide anything from me. I can see how he is in public, how he's talking about opponent soldier and all that and putting people down. He's a very nasty man. But these persons were poking the bear. They were actually, this war was ignited by NATO. It's not, I said in my post today, this is not Putin's war. Putin not the aggression in this war. Jeffrey Sachs would agree with me on that. John Misheimer would agree with me on that.
Jeffrey Sachs, I just got to be aware of past maybe a year or two. And I like him. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to agree with him everything, but he's more of I always say the libertarian should be behind because he actually is for eliminating wars because he knows what it is there's a corresponding loss of liberty and income and a standard of living for our country every time we engage in another war. He seems to have that down, pretty, and I agree with him on that.
Yeah, Jeffrey Sachs, I agree with you on that. And Jeffrey Sachs is a scholar from Columbia University. And you have to give him a lot of credit for being a person that stands out from all the rest and willing to take a chance on what the man is saying. Sachs goes over and sits in on these discussions. So this man is not some outsider. He's in the field because he's right there on the spot when the events are taking place, and he's read the documents, primary documents, while they're being created. He's been advising some of these governments within his field. His field is pretty much economics, but but his area is expertise in Eastern European politics, and he recites that like a song and a dance. But he would not disagree with me in my saying that this war would not have occurred, not because they're scared of Trump. Trump would never have gone up to the borders of Russia and poked the bear like that, where he's actually doing things they knew they were crossing red lines, and Putin had to draw a line in the sand finally at Ukraine, and they knew that was an ultimate line because look how much of the border they share on the southwest side of Russia. You look at the map and you see that this is a provocation. It's a NATO provocation. It's a U.S. provocation. They should never gone that close to Russia's border because Russia would not have any more objection to, any less of objection to it being at his border than we were when Cuba was at our border. When Russia was at our border, that was unconscionable. They would do that. You let China put some missiles in Rio Grande, then it would not be allowed. And people are saying, well, a country has the right to sovereignty to do that. You don't have the sovereign right to do that. You don't have a right to bring about confrontation in the world that endangers the whole world because you got people militarily armed with nuclear weapons on both sides. You don't have the right to do that. And so the sovereignty claim you can make that Russia has no right to tell Ukraine not to join NATO. They do have a right to tell that because you don't have the right to, in fact, poke the war, a nuclear power and provoke them into having to defend themselves from what would happen if they join NATO. Because if they have a problem with Ukraine and in NATO, then all the NATO alliances are in that conflict. And Russia's not going to tolerate that. Now I'll tell you right now, there will be no settlement of this war going on until that is in fact settled. That's the critical point right there. And Zelensky, is another point, is very crafty and very smart in saying, listen to how he talks. Listen to what this man is saying. He's saying that as if he's going to do this, he's willing to step down uh, if uh, if Ukraine is allowed into NATO. Now, this guy is not no dummy. He knows that that's the sticking point. That's what's holding up everything. That's what they're fighting over. And he's talking about if Ukraine, like he's really caring about Ukraine. The man has torn his country up. He's allowed his country to be torn up as long as he got paid. As long as his cronies in government got paid. In the most criminal country in Europe. But he's talking about he's willing to step down. He's being sacrificial. He's willing to step down if and when the Ukraine's allowed into NATO. That's the problem. He knows that. He's acting like he's just simply want to get that done because he's worried about the security of Ukraine. He's not worried about the security of Ukraine. You brought war upon the people in Ukraine. That war should never happen, not because of Trump. It should never. It would not happen if Trump hadn't been in power. But it's not just because of Trump. Trump would never provoke that war. Trump was smart enough to know that the reason why we were anxious about Cuba was because we do not want Russia having missiles in Cuba 120 miles from the coast of the United States, from Florida. I'm sorry, 90 miles from Florida. 6 minutes away. It's too close for superpowers to be that close to each other. Distance is necessary to create harmony, and you want buffer. What if Zelensky cared one thing about his country, he would have understood that his country must remain a border neutral state, and he did understand that. But what happened to him was this right here. That's that money. All that money going over to Ukraine, where they got property all over the country, all over the world, with American money. And Carson, who is very brave, I give him a lot of credit for this. Carson went over there to look at this for himself. He didn't want anybody to tell him about what's going on. He wanted to go and see for himself. He was the person that I give him credit for going over there and doing the interview of Putin. We all had Ukraine side. Who's talking to Putin? He went over and interview Putin.
Some people said he was an act of treason going over there to interview Putin. And I said, Putin, and I said, how is it an interview? That's what a journalist is supposed to do.
Yeah.
That's what a journalist is supposed to do. He wasn't, I mean, you just let say what they're going to say, let the lumps, let the chips fall where they may. But no, he was considered, because he wears a bow tie and he's conservative or whatever. He used to wear a bow tie. But I mean, yeah, they got such double standards.
Yeah.
I mean, when you had back in the Vietnam era, you had people actually deliver alleged journalists siding with the Marxists and the communists. That was nothing. Now that was just trying to be be objective. But Tucker Carlson goes over there and interviews Putin. He's a traitor. Yeah.
Carson did what any journalist. I'm not talking about these fake journalists. Any journalist would have done the same thing. What's the other side? What's page 2? And page 2 was going over to talk to the nemesis to find out what is he saying about the conflict, to get both sides, and then let the American people have the information from both sides of the fence, and then we can decide how we feel about it. How are you going to be able to be involved in make it an informed choice when you only have one side of the question? And Carson did an American patriotic service to the United States by going over and getting Putin. And what we found in Putin, when Putin was talking, this man was not a madman. He's a very smart man. You might not agree with him. I may not agree with him. I'm not compelled to say that I'm not compelled to say that I don't agree with him. There are some things I agree with him on. I don't agree with anybody 100%, but there's some things I agree with Putin on. But I can tell you that Putin did not instigate this war. This is not just because he went into Ukraine does not mean that the aggression is Putin. Putin is responding to the aggression. The aggression, you don't see it because people do not get analytical training. But people do not see this. The aggression, they look at the aggression, this guy sent missiles over there, sent his army there. Yeah. But the provocation is not that. That's a response to the provocation. The provocation is those persons that in fact provoke where you push him into a corner to do that. All you have to do is to look at the map and see Estonia, NATO today. Used to be part of the Russian Empire. Lithuania used to be part of the Russian Empire. Latvia used to be part of the empire of Russia. Look at where they are. Look at the location of them. If you allow the the southwest border to be taken over and placed into NATO, like those countries have been placed in NATO, you got Russia completely surrounded, blocking them off from the west, because already blocked in terms of Sweden, Norway, and so on, all the way down the corridor of the west coast of Russia. So you have to now stop the aggression. That's the aggression right there. You have to stop the aggression. And that's what Russia was in fact doing. And I give Carson and others that have come out, Jeffrey Sachs, I give you a lot of credit. Ms. Hyman, thank you a lot for what you're doing. It takes a lot of courage to do this. You love your country. You criticize the country when the country is in fact going down the wrong road. And that's what they're doing. This war would not have happened if Trump had been president, because Trump would have been too smart to do what they're doing right now. And what Trump is doing right now is trying to head off World War III. He needs some help. Okay, got to get out of here. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.